The calm of a traditional royal briefing was shattered when Prince William uttered 11 words that changed the future of the York family forever. In a room filled with silence and watchful eyes, the Duke of Cambridge declared that the York inheritance would no longer remain within its expected bloodline. The target? Princess Eugenie. The beneficiary? Young Prince Louis. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The invitation had arrived with barely 24 hours' notice, its wording formal, but its tone curiously urgent. Eugenie, caught off guard, arrived at Kensington Palace in understated attire, accompanied by her elder sister Beatrice, both unaware of the seismic shift about to unfold. The blue drawing room, typically a haven of polite ceremony and royal restraint, felt different that day. Courtiers lingered by the walls, their faces unreadable. Something was coming, something that would rewrite the unspoken rules of lineage, loyalty, and legacy. When Prince William entered, the air tightened. He carried a sealed leather folder marked with the emblem of the Royal Succession Office. No aide flanked him, no whisper preceded his voice. The silence was pierced only by the crisp sound of the seal breaking as he opened the folder. With poised authority, he began reading a statement, his voice unwavering. Effective immediately, the stewardship and full holding rights of the York inheritance shall be redirected to Prince Louis of Wales. Gasps were muffled, but none were louder, even in silence, than Eugenie's stunned breath. Beatrice leaned in, whispering something hurriedly to her sister, but Eugenie sat frozen, her eyes wide, her posture stiff. This wasn't a symbolic shift or ceremonial restructure. This was an erasure, a redirection of legacy she had believed was hers since birth. Centuries-old properties, royal heirlooms, and historic titles once safeguarded under the York family crest were now promised to a boy who had not yet reached double digits in age. Notably absent from the proceedings were Charles and Camilla. Their absence raised eyebrows. Was this William acting on the king's behalf, or had the Prince of Wales taken a bold, unprecedented step on his own? The whispers began almost immediately. If this was Charles's decision, why hadn't he been the one to deliver it? And if it wasn't, what gave William the authority to bypass traditional protocols? As the weight of the statement settled, Eugenie's composure wavered. One witness later revealed that her hand trembled as she tried to sip her tea. Another claimed that she turned to Beatrice and quietly asked, "Does this mean I'm no longer part of the future?" That single sentence, murmured in disbelief, echoed through the royal halls long after the meeting ended. A York legacy built over generations, now seemingly erased in less than a minute. But the shock in the blue drawing room was only the beginning. What followed was a storm of confrontation, broken trusts, and a centuries-old legacy ripped open before the world. The House of York carried a legacy once deemed untouchable. From palatial estates to antique jewels, the line was a pillar of royal tradition. But William's statement shattered not just the inheritance, but the very soul of the York identity. It was never about money, not truly. For Princess Eugenie, the York inheritance was not merely a portfolio of castles, land, or ceremonial duties. It was blood. It was memory. It was the echo of centuries etched into stone and sealed in crests. Generations of Yorks had upheld the quiet strength of this offshoot royal line, holding their ground through triumph and scandal alike. From the grandeur of Royal Lodge to the dignified artifacts once belonging to the Queen Mother, the York identity had endured as something solid until now. Eugenie had always felt the weight of that legacy, not as a burden but as a birthright. In personal letters unearthed by palace insiders, she often referred to herself as the guardian of memory. She believed her role, though ceremonial in the public eye, was steeped in preservation. The idea of eventually passing down York's treasures to her own son, continuing that lineage of quiet but steadfast service, was more than a dream. It was a purpose. And that purpose, without warning, had been seized. The cracks had begun forming months earlier, though few had dared to look closely. Behind the royal smiles and coordinated appearances, tension simmered between William's increasingly centralized circle and the York sisters. Eugenie and Beatrice had been drifting further from the core of royal affairs, pushed to the periphery, while William, Catherine, and their children became the axis of the modern monarchy. Beatrice, ever more intuitive than she let on, had sensed the change. Some aides said she'd even been discreetly warned that shifts in inheritance planning were imminent, but she'd kept that burden to herself. For Eugenie, the betrayal wasn't just royal, it was personal. To be blindsided, to have been excluded from discussions about her own ancestral line, left her hollowed. Her father's controversies had already left bruises on her public standing, but this was an open wound. William's decision, intentional or not, framed her not as a victim of circumstance, but as unworthy. As if her loyalty, her conduct, her devotion were erased by proximity to scandal, while her cousin's child, still untouched by the weight of legacy, was deemed the safer vessel for the future. Even within the family, eyebrows were raised. Prince Edward, known for his restraint, reportedly voiced private concern that shifting the York inheritance so abruptly could destabilize already fragile loyalties inside the palace. Royal unity, which had always been carefully crafted, now hung by a thread of perception. If a royal daughter could be brushed aside so easily, who else was dispensable in this new regime? And just as Eugenie began grasping the reality of her loss, another unexpected figure emerged from the shadows, someone who would ignite a firestorm that no one saw coming. Beatrice didn't speak at the announcement, but behind closed doors, her silence morphed into something far more dangerous, a mission to protect her sister at all costs, even if it meant taking on the very core of the monarchy's new power structure. In the moment Prince William uttered the fateful words, all eyes were on Eugenie, but those who looked closer saw the subtle transformation in Beatrice. She didn't cry, she didn't flinch. Her expression remained eerily composed, too composed. Not a twitch betrayed the storm that brewed beneath. While her sister tried to steady her breath, Beatrice's eyes locked onto William's with a glint that didn't ask questions. It promised answers. She understood the game immediately, and she also understood that she would not play by its rules. An hour after the meeting concluded, whispers rippled through the palace halls. Beatrice had been seen storming toward the car park, her aides scrambling to catch up. Her phone was already in hand, and by the time she reached the black Range Rover waiting for her, she was deep in a call no one could trace. That silence in the blue drawing room had only lasted a moment. Outside those walls, it erupted into fury, phone calls, and veiled warnings that something was stirring within the royal circle, and it wasn't going to stay quiet. Within 24 hours it began. A cryptic message leaked from Beatrice's close confidants reached the tabloids. Some inherit land, others inherit loyalty. The quote, anonymous yet unmistakably sourced, sent shockwaves through the aristocratic press. It wasn't just a defense of Eugenie, it was a line drawn in the sand. Loyalty in Beatrice's world had always been personal, and now it was political. Behind the scenes, Zara Tyndall, a royal with her own complex relationship to the crown, had already reached out. The conversations weren't public, but insiders confirmed that the two cousins were exchanging messages far more frequently than usual. Discussions had begun cautiously about what solidarity might look like in a family where tradition often meant silence. Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, Beatrice's husband, was reportedly outraged. As a man familiar with power structures and legacy, he understood immediately what this meant. A quiet call was placed to his legal team, not to challenge the inheritance directly, but to explore the implications. What precedents had been broken? What private understandings had been ignored? His questions weren't about property, they were about principle, and that made him more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Beneath it all, something rare was emerging: resolve. The York sisters, often dismissed as ceremonial relics in a new royal era, were no longer interested in preservation. They were awakening. Bound once by decorum, they were now bound by defiance. This wasn't about reclaiming riches, it was about reclaiming dignity. And Beatrice had made it her mission to ensure that Eugenie's erasure would not go unanswered. But while Beatrice plotted in silence, Eugenie sought answers and found herself standing face to face with the man who had redrawn the royal map overnight. Beneath a grey sky in the palace garden, Princess Eugenie approached her cousin not with tears, but with steel. What was meant to be a private apology unraveled into a revelation about power, betrayal, and William's chilling justification for his decision. No aides, no press, just two royal bloodlines now fractured by one irreversible decision. The message for the meeting had come discreetly, passed through intermediaries in hopes of containing what had already begun to spill beyond the palace walls. Eugenie didn't expect reconciliation. She came for clarity. Her steps were measured, but her heart raced with an ache that had no outlet, only focus. William, already waiting, appeared calm. His demeanor was practiced, the kind one wears not in mourning but in the face of dissent. He welcomed her, but not warmly. It wasn't a meeting of equals, it was an audience with a decision-maker. Eugenie didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her voice, soft yet deliberate, cut the air. "Was I ever considered?" she asked. There was no need to elaborate. He knew exactly what she meant. For a moment, William didn't answer. He simply studied her, as though weighing the cost of honesty. Then came his response, measured, deliberate, final. "Louis must represent the future monarchy's integrity," he said. The words were precise, but what they implied felt like a dagger. Eugenie heard what wasn't spoken. Her bloodline no longer qualified. Her father's shadows now extended into her future, no matter how far she'd stepped away from them. The silence between them grew unbearable. William continued, his tone almost clinical. He spoke of broader plans, of optics, of institutional trust and modern monarchy values. He assured her it wasn't personal, but every word landed like a verdict. The language of strategy veiled the truth of judgment. Eugenie stood still, but her heart burned. She had upheld her duties, maintained her dignity, and asked for nothing but the right to carry her family's legacy. And now, in the name of image, that birthright had been deemed a liability. She asked him quietly, but firmly, if this was the path forward for the entire family. Would Beatrice be next? Would others be sidelined under the guise of renewal? William didn't answer that. Instead, he offered a chilling phrase, "Not everyone is built for the weight of tomorrow." That was all. No apology, no reversal. Just the certainty of a future already drafted without her name in the margins. The conversation ended without resolution, without a promise, without hope. Eugenie didn't shed a tear. She didn't plead. She turned, spine straight, heart hollow, and walked away without looking back. The grass beneath her feet absorbed the tremble she refused to show. Her royal name still intact, but her place within the firm's future now cruelly redrawn. Eugenie's world was spinning, but within palace corridors, murmurs of another agenda began to leak, and it all pointed toward Prince Louis's sudden elevation. Why Prince Louis? Why now? As analysts, insiders, and courtiers scrambled to decode the move, one truth emerged. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was about image, lineage, and royal control. Beneath the surface of tradition, a new architecture of power was quietly being assembled. And at its center, Catherine's influence was no longer subtle, it was strategic. Her presence, once underestimated by senior royal players, had evolved into something far more commanding. For years, she had remained publicly poised and privately cautious. But now, those close to the palace whispered about her role not just as William's wife, but as the monarch-in-waiting's advisor in all but name. With every decision, every engagement, and every carefully worded press release, her blueprint for a modernized monarchy took shape. And Prince Louis, her youngest, was fast becoming the vessel through which that vision would manifest. It was William's long-term vision that pushed the shift into motion. No longer content with symbolism alone, he sought consolidation of wealth, titles, legacy. He had seen the cost of a fractured royal system, the competing bloodlines, the scandals that stemmed from blurred roles and undefined futures. He was determined to secure the monarchy's path not just for George, but for the generation beyond. Louis wasn't just chosen, he was positioned, a clean slate, a child untouched by royal fallout. A prince not yet marred by controversy, yet deeply tied to the image of continuity. In William's mind, Louis was the monarchy's fresh beginning, a living, breathing reset button. Yet the decision to place such weight on his youngest son raised more than eyebrows. Leaked from a confidential briefing, A hidden memo drafted 2 years prior by Charles himself revealed that Beatrice and Eugenie had once been proposed as co-stewards of the York inheritance, a gesture meant to protect and preserve a branch of the family quietly fading from royal prominence. That document, shelved without explanation, was quietly overwritten by William's recent directive. The question wasn't just why Louis had been chosen, but who had been erased in the process. In tandem, the royal narrative began to shift in tone. Subtle phrases appeared in palace releases. Phrases like heritage guardian, future continuity, and renewed trust began to orbit around Louis's name. Insiders were told this was about future-proofing the monarchy, that Louis symbolized unity, purity, and the promise of tomorrow. But not everyone accepted this rebranding, least of all Queen Camilla. Sources close to her revealed she had been blindsided by the move cut out of discussions that directly affected the royal balance. Some claim she believed one of her own grandchildren might eventually inherit a formal role in the crown's estate structure. But now, the chessboard had shifted, and she hadn't even been invited to the game. The winds of reform blew strong from William's wing of the palace. But not all voices were silenced, not all loyalties erased. Because while the Windsors orchestrated the shift in public image, another faction prepared a quiet but fierce retaliation, led by a woman who knew the crown's buried secrets. She's endured scandal, exile, and ridicule, but now Sarah Ferguson stepped back into the ring. Not for herself, but for her daughter. And what she said in her secret plea to Charles could reshape the entire inheritance dispute. For years, Sarah had remained at the edges, seen, scrutinized, but largely silent. Her presence at royal events was tolerated, never celebrated. Her name, forever tethered to Prince Andrew's controversies, carried more baggage than prestige. But this time was different. This time, it wasn't about saving face, it was about saving legacy. Quietly, without announcement or spectacle, Sarah arranged a private meeting with King Charles at Clarence House. It wasn't protocol, it wasn't expected, but she didn't care. She walked into that room not as the Duchess of York, but as a mother desperate to restore what she believed had been stolen from her child. Charles reportedly greeted her with reserved warmth, perhaps out of politeness, perhaps out of guilt. But Sarah didn't waste time. With trembling hands and unwavering voice, she laid out her plea. "This is not about Andrew," she said, firm and deliberate. "This is about Eugenie. This is about her birthright." It was a line drawn not in defense of scandal, but in defense of a daughter unfairly cast into its shadow. She reached into her bag and pulled out copies of private letters correspondence from Queen Elizabeth II herself. In one, the late monarch had written of her faith in Eugenie's character and her intention to preserve certain York family jewels under her stewardship. The writing was clear, the sentiment unmistakable. It was a royal grandmother's quiet assurance, a promise now broken. Charles read the letters in silence. Those close to the conversation say his expression shifted. He was moved. For a moment, the weight of monarchy gave way to the vulnerability of family, but then came the shift, the cold return to duty. He spoke of modern optics, of public trust, of the delicate balance the monarchy now tread. "There's regret," he reportedly told her, "but there's also order." The words landed like stone, a diplomatic dismissal cloaked in sorrow. Sarah, overwhelmed by the dismissal of both her daughter's right and the late Queen's will, broke down. She wept, not out of weakness, but out of sheer disbelief that a family could forget so quickly, so coldly. Before she left, she turned back and made one final statement, not loud, but sharp. "You're erasing her, Charles, and the world will notice." Then she walked away, tears still fresh, dignity intact. It wasn't just a mother's plea, it was a warning, a quiet declaration that this would not be buried without resistance. As Sarah walked away from the meeting, she wasn't alone. Beatrice had already begun planning the next move. And this time, it wouldn't be a plea, it would be a war cry. In the dead of night, a quiet summit took place between women not known for rebellion, but now bound by frustration. What they forged was more than an alliance. It was a silent declaration of resistance against a system that had gone too far. It began with a message short, direct, unmistakable in tone. Zara Tyndall, a royal without titles but never without influence, reached out to Beatrice not as a cousin but as a woman who had seen enough. Her words were simple: "We need to talk." For Eugenie, that message opened a door long kept shut. Behind it waited a bond forged not by power but by shared disillusionment. Beatrice, still reeling from the betrayal that struck her sister's name from the York legacy, didn't hesitate. This wasn't about protocol anymore, it's about justice. They met off the record. No aids, no formalities. And yet, what unfolded in that meeting had the potential to shake the foundation of the Crown's current trajectory. But it wasn't just the two of them. To Beatrice's surprise, Princess Anne joined quietly, unannounced but deeply intentional. Anne, the stalwart royal who had withstood decades of shifting power plays, was not there to mourn. She was there to advise. Her approval alone carried more weight than any press release, and her presence signaled something clear: this situation had crossed a line. As conversation unfolded, Zara introduced a radical idea. If the official structure could be rewritten to favor Prince Louis, then so could an unofficial one be created to protect Eugenie's child. A private royal trust structured outside the palace's grip would ensure that at least some part of the York legacy continued, even if quietly, even if in exile. Beatrice listened, eyes sharp, heart heavy. She had felt powerless for days, but now she felt the pulse of purpose returning. But it wasn't just about preservation, it was about narrative, about how to counter William's sweeping decision without igniting a full-blown palace war. They discussed tactics, ways to let the public see Eugenie's side without implicating the Crown. Stories of her charity work, her unblemished record, her closeness to the late Queen. Subtle signals, released in carefully timed waves, to remind the nation who she truly was before scandal by association clouded perception. Anne, ever the realist, warned them, "This isn't just about Louis, it's about precedent. If they can rewrite history for one child, they'll do it again. To any of us." That line stayed with them long after the meeting ended. For the first time, they saw the threads connecting their separate lives into something larger. A quiet war was being waged not with declarations, but with decisions, and they had just chosen to step into the battlefield. The trio parted with no formal agreement, no signatures exchanged, but with one unspoken truth seared into all their minds: Eugenie cannot walk alone into royal oblivion. Not while they still had voices, not while there was still something left to protect. But as alliances formed in hushed tones, the world outside was beginning to ask questions. And Eugenie had one final card to play before her fate was sealed. Just when all seemed lost, a forgotten envelope surfaced bearing the unmistakable seal of Queen Elizabeth II. Inside, a handwritten letter that could unravel everything William had declared and potentially restore Eugenie's shattered claim. It began with a routine inventory deep within the royal archives, an act of housekeeping, not revelation. A vault once belonging to Princess Margaret, long considered sealed and inconsequential, was quietly reopened as part of an archival update. Among dated manuscripts, old invitations and worn diaries sat an envelope no one expected. Its seal, the unmistakable crimson crest of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Its addressee, no one, no label. Only the symbol, the kind of letter meant for time, not delivery. It was marked 2018, penned in the Queen's own hand, and what it contained sent a quiet shock through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. The letter's contents were elegant but piercing. Elizabeth had written about Eugenie with an intimacy no official statement had ever captured. She spoke of her unique spirit and unwavering sense of duty, praising her as a bridge between tradition and modernity. But it was one line in particular that turned this from sentimental relic to political detonator. The Queen's expressed intent to grant Eugenie stewardship over several specific heirlooms tied to the York family line. She wrote of them not merely as possessions, but as symbols of continuity, artifacts she believed Eugenie would protect with the grace the name deserves. The letter was not a legal document. It wasn't a will. But it bore the emotional weight of the monarch's personal conviction, and that alone made it impossible to ignore. Eugenie, informed of the discovery, didn't hesitate. With counsel, she brought the letter to senior royal advisors, not in anger, but with solemn purpose. She didn't demand reversal, she simply asked them to read it, to look past the strategies and press optics, and see what had been buried not by time, but by choice. Reactions were varied. Some advisors were visibly stunned. Others deflected with familiar phrases like constitutional boundaries and informal sentiments. But the weight of the Queen's words lingered, casting a long shadow over the legitimacy of William's recent decision. Inside William's camp, tension spiked. The pressure wasn't just coming from the outside, it was internal. Reports swirled that Catherine, known for her sharp political instinct and careful calibration, had urged William to pause. "Stand down for now," she reportedly told him. It wasn't a surrender, it was strategy. She understood better than anyone the danger of being seen as erasing the Queen's final wishes, especially now, when the royal family's moral authority was already under siege. The discovery of the letter didn't fix everything, but it cracked the narrative. It gave Eugenie something more powerful than anger. It gave her legitimacy. What had once been an emotional plea had become a royal precedent. And with it, the tide began to shift. And just when the world thought the storm had passed, a royal press release changed everything, leaving both Eugenie and Louis in a new, unimaginable position. It wasn't a win, it wasn't a loss, it was something in between. As the crown brokered a rare compromise, the York legacy was split, not erased. But the scars left behind on Eugenie, William, and the monarchy itself may never fully heal. The press release arrived with clinical precision, timed, edited, and worded to neutralize tension rather than ignite resolution. It stated that, effective immediately, key elements of the York inheritance would be placed under shared custodianship. Prince Louis, the youngest face of the modern monarchy, would assume financial oversight under a new trust. Princess Eugenie would retain ceremonial stewardship, overseeing the symbolic and historic legacy of the York lineage. The arrangement was branded as forward-facing, a phrase that attempted to disguise the bruises left behind by weeks of internal war. It was a compromise masked in royal language, carefully crafted to avoid blame yet acknowledge fracture. William's camp moved quickly to frame the resolution as innovative leadership. A senior advisor described it as a modern solution for a modern monarchy, insisting it reflected the evolving nature of royal roles in a new era. But behind the polish of public statements, the damage was evident. This wasn't just about assets or titles, it was about trust. It was about belonging. Eugenie, who had been thrust into a storm she never sought, remained publicly silent. No interviews, no appearances. But those close to her said she felt hollowed but vindicated. She hadn't regained everything, but she'd regained something, enough to stand with her name intact. King Charles, ever the strategist, reportedly expressed quiet satisfaction at the outcome. He viewed the compromise as stability regained, a thread stitched back into the unraveling royal fabric. But not everyone shared his sentiment. Tensions with Queen Camilla continued to simmer, with whispers that she viewed the outcome as a precedent too generous, one that might invite future challenges to carefully drawn succession lines. In private circles, her influence appeared momentarily diminished, but not forgotten. She'd watched the throne navigate around her input. That silence, insiders say, will not last. For now, the monarchy had sidestepped a deeper fracture, but the cost of survival was becoming increasingly clear. Each resolution left residue. Each compromise revealed how brittle the institution had become behind its golden doors. The public saw a functioning monarchy. Inside, those who lived it saw something else, a structure constantly balancing image against inheritance, loyalty against ambition, and tradition against reform. And so, the palace gates remained closed, but the story remained open. As Prince Louis plays in the palace gardens, unaware of the legacy already laid at his feet, and Eugenie walks a corridor lined with history she almost lost, one question remains: how many more secrets lie buried beneath the crown? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.